Hello, welcome back. Uh,
Welcome
Before
back.
we start this episode, I need to make a very serious apology. I want to apologize to the entirety of anime because for the very first episode that we did about anime was on Rent a Girlfriend, and I think that's just like starting off on a really bad foot. There's so many better things than Rent a Girlfriend. I don't know what possessed me to think that this is like the best foot forward to put. So
Is definitely an earned apology for
yeah.
sure. I'm so glad that we're clearing the air and, getting back in touch with our followers who were very blindsided by our decision. And this is a necessary remedy for us as a collective, as a group, as influencers at this point, to apologize to the community as a whole because what we did was truly despicable, truly unacceptable, and I fully blame on.
Yes, I'll take the
So,
blame. To be clear though, I'm not taking back that we roasted the hell out of Rent a Girlfriend. It deserved it. I'm taking back that we did it first.
that we did it first before anything else.
All right, so to make up for that, we are actually going to do a genuine top pick good anime this time, and not Raccoon
Yay!
Rambles it to all hell again.
Fantastic. I am actually so excited for this episode. This was actually one of the first episodes that Anna and I ever had planned when we first started doing podcasting.
Hmm.
And when we were coming up with a concept for it, we really had this one like on our list. It
Yeah,
was one of the first things that we ever put on our list because it was one of the first pieces of art that he and I like actually talked about together, I
I
think.
think it might be one of the first things we like
Um,
watched together. Period.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember like I don't know, like I remember I watched this when I was really young, like middle school young, and then revisiting it again for this podcast has been such like a special little thing that I've been able to do for myself. It's almost like I was like gifting myself by like throwing back, but it's such a sweet show and there's a lot that we have to unpack here, of course, but overall, it's like it has a really sweet nostalgia for me because I did kind of like quote unquote grow up watching it, and I don't know, the show makes me happy.
It does. It makes me happy and then like sad and like pained and every emotion at the exact same time.
Yeah, yeah. So we're gonna go over sort of the fruits basket as like an entity, and this is a part one of a hopefully two-parter series, at least for now, that we're gonna be doing on the series as a whole. For now, we're gonna cover basically like what the show is all about, the different kinds of content that it covers, sort of the air of the show, and you know basically why you want to buy what it's selling. And I want to preface this episode definitely by putting a lot of content warning, trigger warnings in it just to start.
Hmm.
There are a lot of things that this show covers that are very, very touchy, very heavy, very deep topics. So, just really quickly, for anyone who may or may not be triggered by any of these following topics, maybe sit
Sit
this
this
one
one
out.
out.
Maybe sit this one
Maybe the
out.
next episode too. Yeah.
Yeah. As much as, this show is near and dear to my heart, there are certain experiences within it that I don't empathize with on a as personal a level as it does like as it would trigger me, but I am aware that there are definitely touchy subjects in this show that I need to warn people about before we start talking about it. So without further ado, suicide, self harm, ostracism, familial abuse, gender and power dynamics, and self doubt, anxiety, depression.
All right. Just list
Those are all the content
everything
warnings out there.
possible off for it.
Yes, all the all the good stuff. Also, for those of you who haven't watched the show yet, It's not violent in any particular way, and again, we'll get a little bit deeper into this, but I know that starting off with all the content warnings is kind of like, this does not have anything to do with fruits or baskets. Like, what is going on? I promise you that the show in and of itself it has a lot more to do with a bunch of other things other than those things, but those are topics that are going to be covered, so I did feel the need to just put that out there.
All right. Also, I think along with all of our warnings, also a spoiler warning.
Oh,
Spoilers
yeah.
for the show and maybe spoilers for the concept of fruits or baskets. I don't know. You
Yeah.
stay here and figure it out.
I always forget to put spoiler warnings. I feel like An is really good about that. Like he's mentioned that in every single like thing that we've done, and I'm just like, let's go right into it. Like, um,
It's been something I've been having
but
to like note every time, just like a little reminder in front of me because
yeah,
I will forget because I get too excited about
yeah.
these.
But yes, spoiler warning and a content warning for you. But without further ado, let's get into it. This manga was written by Natsuki Takaya, a female manga writer. It debuted, and she debuted as a manga artist in 1992. And little fun fact about her is that she is left-handed. Fruits Basket itself debuted in 1998, only 6 years after she debuted as a manga artist, and it became one of the best-selling shoujo manga in North America, and it still is to this day. Fruits Basket has been adapted twice into an anime series. The most recent one came out in 2019. The first one came out in like 2008, I think. But the 2019 one is the one that I watched for the podcast, that I rewatched for the podcast, and it's probably going to be the one that we're, kind of going off of in the episode, unless we want to refer back once or twice maybe to the older series. But from what I can tell, the 2019 version is slightly truer to the manga just in terms of like panel to panel movement, which I think is actually really cool because as the series progresses, like as you go from season to season, the art actually gets progressively better, which is true to form in manga as well, which I thought was really cool and kind of like fun to watch actually rewatching the series. And so, yeah, I do want to start off also by letting On sort of give me his like overall take on Fruits Basket and really what it means to you. Like why is this show in particular near and dear to your heart? Not necessarily the story like itself or
Uh-huh.
like any of the details or whatever, but like why do you like the show?
Well, I guess first of all, it's one of those shows that like we watched together like right when like we first like really started like hanging out and like being friends. So I guess like that is like cool in its own way. Like just
Yeah.
like the beginning of our friendship in a way. But other
Mhm.
than that, it's just like such a good show. Because like you know the thing about like men in like America and like how men grow up in society is that like we're not very good at like feeling things.
Yeah.
Especially with like crying. Like okay, men are really good at being mad, right? That's how we're raised. So like needing like really having the ability to express emotions that are like sad and stuff like that is like
Mhm.
not easy to just like do normally. Like I've talked to a lot of like women and like they're like, yeah, I can like cry more or less on demand. And like that's just something I can't do even if I really need to. So in place of like having a normal healthy way to deal with it, I have a certain set of like pieces of art that really help me like get into that mood and like feel like it's okay to like be feeling those ways. And like if I need to cry, I'll just like work with these pieces of art instead, right? Fruits
Mm.
Basket's one of those. Uh, anything by Makoto Shinkai too, right?
That's a good
And like
one.
that's just like it's like so it occupies this like really interesting part for me of just like being like this like comfort food when I really need it. It's there for me type thing, you know? Like when I really
Mhm.
like am in a shitty place in my life and I just need to like let it all go and just like feel all the emotions. This is like the show for
Mhm.
me for that.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that, again, it is true to form. This show is very emotional, as it's as emotional as it is lighthearted, which I think is such a fascinating balance that it actually has. Like, this is one of those shows where one minute you're like, oh, like it's happy time. And then, like, 2 seconds later, somebody is talking about just like straight up trauma. And you're like, oh, it's not happy time anymore. But somehow it does manage to strike that balance very, very well,
Hmm.
which it is difficult to do. Like, as a writer myself, like the comedic timing and also like emotional timing are things that this show does absolutely masterfully. And just as a series in general, I think that's why it is so compelling, is that you can watch it for fun
Hmm.
and it'll still work for fun.
Yeah.
But there are topics within it that you cannot like get away from with the fun, which is just, it's just, it does everything so well though that you can still watch it and not necessarily have to like think too hard about it, even though it is emotional. And for certain episodes, of course, like it's supposed to be just emotionally charged and it's supposed to be very tragic, but for the most part the series, like, overall is really lighthearted and really fun. And that's hard, that's a hard thing to do, but they do it and it's cool. I also think that the show has just like a fantastic sense of humor.
It really
Like,
does.
I think the comedic timing is just so great. And it's one of the reasons why I think that the show does such a good job of like balancing the heavy nature of what's going on, is that just the sense of humor is just awesome, awesome. Um,
I also think like it does a really good job of like it can be really heavy, but it also has like a lot of really good like resolutions and like thoughtful things to say about like those heavy things. So it's not just like you're
mhm,
just bombarding yourself with like pain, but you're also like getting like resolutions and like thoughtful things to think about regarding like those
mhm,
types of pain, right? So it like
yeah,
it's more cathartic than painful. I mean, like catharsis kind of requires you to go through some like intense emotions and then you hit catharsis, right? But like it never just
mhm,
leaves you just like suffering. And like I'm not saying that's a bad thing. There are absolutely pieces of art in which it leaves you suffering. That's a good thing because then it makes you think. But like
mhm,
this is not one of those things. This is trying to do something else. And like I really
mhm,
appreciate that about this. So like
mhm,
it makes it like a really thoughtful emotional watch, but it never makes it a particularly hard one. Right? I wouldn't
mhm.
list this as like this isn't Anohana or anything like that. That's a hard watch.
Ooh, yeah, yeah. I cause I said this a second ago, but like the pendulum kind of swings back and forth for me with this show, because on one hand I'm like, everybody should watch it, and like, even
Hmm.
if there are like, and there are, right, we talked about this, like there are definitely like triggering topics, but it's so well packaged. It's packaged in such a way that I feel like even if it is like a really intense trigger, there is still this like very deliberate emotion and lightness that comes along with it that I think is like healing in a way.
Hmm.
And that is why I think this story is so compelling and so touching and so powerful in so many ways, and with all of these characters that, I mean, at this point to me like feel like family, right? That you're rooting for all of them and you just want the best outcome for all of them, and in a way seeing characters go through the same things that you may have gone through when you were a child, or experience hardships, right, the same hardships as you, watching that and rooting for them and watching them struggle to make the right decisions but ultimately coming into their own and healing and prospering in the very end, I think is just so beautiful. And I think that is why I don't have a problem recommending this show to people and pushing them to watch it, even if there is a lot of touchy subjects in it. Because I'm like, yes, it's going to probably hurt a little bit to watch, but ultimately, I think it's going to benefit you. And it'll be a fun and healing experience, hopefully, like along the way, you
Hmm.
know?
I also think something else that makes it a really good watch when you're going through things is like there's a lot of characters with a lot of very different problems here. So like you never
Mm-hmm.
just spending time with like one particular problem. Like you might identify with one character in this particular watch because you're at a certain place in your life, but like they're never the only character. So you're also like having to spend a lot of time thinking about like the problems and emotions and like the hurt of other people too, which I think kind of like
Mm-hmm.
helps alleviate all of the intense just like thinking about yourself pain, you know? Right? Because like maybe you're relating like really well to like Kyo. There's but like Kyo's only like one like fourth of like like certain episodes, right? So like there's a lot of like you don't spend all that time just thinking about like the pain that you relate to. You're also thinking about like other people's and like I always think having empathy and thinking about other people's pain is like a good way to like help uh feel less alone in the world when you're going through something
Mm-hmm.
really difficult. And I think that's like one of the things the
Yeah.
show really works well with
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, for sure. No, I also will say that I do think that the best and greatest strength of this show is its characterization. I think that the story itself is almost like pretty simple. Like the
Yeah.
premise of the show is pretty simple. Spoiler alert. Basically, this family that lives with this pseudo magical curse is trying to break the curse. There's a ton of members of the family that are trying to break the curse, and there's one character that is basically the quote unquote god of the curse and of the characters. Of the zodiac. So the curse is the zodiac curse, in which every member of this family, like if they get hugged by a member of the opposite sex that isn't also a part of the family, they turn into an animal of the zodiac. Their somas is the family clan name, and essentially it's them living as like outsiders and but also like craving something more and trying to break the curse so that they can go out and live normal lives.
Hmm.
And all of them in some way shape or form is dealing with some really heavy weight or some kind of self-effacing struggle, some kind of mental illness, some kind of personal tragedy that they're all trying to overcome and love despite, all those things. And the story is basically just them like figuring out how to break the curse. This story is 100% character driven.
Yeah.
Like you're not necessarily watching for the plot, you know. I, but I always see like fruits basket memes where it's like I watch anime for the plot, and then it's like edits of like Kyo and Yuki and like the plot that like they're the plot. So yeah, if you're watching for the plot, pretty boy plot,
There's
there's a lot
that
of eye
too.
candy in this show. Yeah.
Also to say something about the
But
curse, there's also a
yeah.
dimension of the curse that's like it's like I wouldn't say it's like partially literal, partially metaphorical, in which like the zodiac members feel very drawn towards God. Um, and like that's kind of representing this like it's like representing like this type of like bond that they have towards God, which their locks them into like this bad relationship with God that like leads to like a lot of their pain and stuff like that. And it's like kind of
Mhm.
metaphorical about like how abuse works and like because like a lot of the time people like when they're
Mhm.
thinking about like people who are abused, they're like, why don't you just leave? Right. And it's never that easy.
Mhm.
Right. The
Mhm.
show does a really good, and the show kind of just like shortcuts that by saying
Mhm.
this curse makes them feel compelled to continue to be in a relationship with like their abuser. Right. Um,
Mhm.
that's why I say it's like partially metaphorical, but partially also literal. Like I think
Mhm.
it's really just trying to like just have you accept that this is the way that like abuse works without having to explain it
Mhm.
because some people just aren't going to get it immediately. All right, so it's just kind
Mhm.
of like, okay, we'll throw this in, and then once we hook you for 3 seasons, then you'll get it at the end.
Fair enough. I also do think I really do think that you are entirely correct in that like analysis of what the curse is, and like the curse has I think two facets which are really fascinating. The first one is obviously like the physical aspect of it where like they literally turn into animals when they get physically affection like when they get physical affection from the opposite sex, right?
Hmm.
And then there is like that spiritual, more like metaphysical aspect of the curse that you can actually see, but is talked about like all the time throughout the show. And I think you're right. Like the bond itself is very symbolic of the cycle of abuse. And I think that it's actually really interesting that you bring that up too, because I feel like the curse itself and the way that it sort of operates within the clan is like it's the main part, but it's almost also secondary to the actual like the curse isn't the only thing going
Yeah.
on, right? Which makes it secondary to like everything else these characters are actually going through, which is kind of crazy because you would think that like living with a literal curse, like a magical curse that restricts you from like being able to have like normal relationships with people, right? Um would be like the forefront of every single family member's like qualms with the world,
Yeah.
but then like the author's like no, actually like this this character's mom also like committed suicide and like everybody blames him for it. And I'm like, "Oh my god. That's a
Uh-huh.
lot. That's pretty intense." Like he's dealing with a curse and that okay, that's great, you know? Like as much as the curse is like this symbolism for something greater, it's also like takes a back seat to the actual stuff that's happening. It's really weird. It's a very interesting dynamic where it's like it's supposed to represent something else, but it's also on the more physical like on the meta level, it's doing something symbolic, but on the physical level, it takes a back seat to the thing that it's literally symbolizing.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense, like it's a weird little circle. Um,
I may
but
like
yeah.
I may disagree with that to an extent because like if you're gonna let me put my structural like analysis glasses on and let me do like a
Alrighty, let's
power
go.
dynamics analysis, you know,
Let's
we
go. Pull out the
philosophers do
whiteboard.
that.
Pull out the whiteboard and
uh,
start taking
I think the
notes.
curse also like plays a part in like legitimizing like traditional power structures like within the family, and that process of like this like abusive power structure being legitimized is like also a is also a criticism on how like status quo power structures legitimize and have knock on effects for people that aren't completely obvious, but when you trace it back, it makes sense, right? And like that's what we do with like
Mm-hmm.
structural analysis and stuff like that. We look at how uh, these these like power structures, these like status quo, we don't unconscious power structures like have knock on effects. So like you're talking about like Kyo and his mom's suicide and how that affects him, but that's also the reason why she committed suicide is because of his curse, right? Or it's debatable, but like that's one of the reasons why it's implied. And the reason why he gets isolated after she commits suicide instead of being helped, because most kids would be helped, is because of this implicit power structure that the curse like locks him into, right? The same thing with like
Mm-hmm.
Yuki and his mom. Like the reason why he feels has this bad relationship with his mom is because she's using him at least at the beginning. He feels like he's being used for her power plays within this structure, and it's like being legitimized by the curse, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that like all of the like it feels like all the like the the characters' problems are kind of separate from the curse, and to a degree they are, right? But I also think
Mm-hmm.
they are kind of also existent because the curse is legitimizing like the types of like secondary effects that like their parents or like society are putting onto these kids because
Mm-hmm.
the curse just like allows them to, right? Like Kyo was born as a cat, so
Mm-hmm.
societally he's like mandated to be ostracized, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
that's only happening because people are accepting the curse as a legitimate form of social power, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like or the way that they break the curse, spoilers for 3 seasons in, uh,
Mm.
is by no longer giving power to it. They recognize that it's a broken system, that these rules are arbitrary and pointless, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
purposely reject it, and that's how the whole curse actually gets broken, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so
I actually like that.
yeah, so maybe the curse is running like triple metaphor duty.
Yeah, literally. You were talking about it, and I was like, no, yeah, actually, that makes sense too. And again, like this show has so many layers to it. The story has, I mean, we could literally spend, and we probably are going to spend like hours talking about it because there's just so much to unpack in terms of what's happening on like the micro levels and also the macro levels and like what it's doing meta wise and like how it's actually translating onto paper slash like the actual medium of like a show, you know. And it's really doing a lot. But speaking of Kyo's mother, we're probably gonna go like and this is, you know, but we're probably gonna go like through the content warning list and just go through how all of these characters or how all of those like sort of things play into the story itself. So yeah, speaking of Kyo's mom, suicide in the show is it's hard. It's very hard to watch Kyo like deal with that. Just as you said, is summarized for us very handily just a second ago. Kyo's mom commits suicide because he was born with the spirit of the cat, which is basically means that he's mandated to be ostracized by the rest of the family.
For those who don't know,
The
the cat
spirit
is not part of the traditional like zodiac, right?
Yes. And the reason for that is that in the quote unquote, original story with the original Zodiac, the rat tricked the cat when the emperor was holding his party, the emperor being God, right? When God was holding his party, he tricked the cat into saying the wrong date. And so the rat and everybody else ended up going, all the other 12 animals, and the cat was the only one who was left behind. So there's 12 animals of the original Zodiac, and then the spirit of the cat is this outlier that doesn't quite fit in anywhere. And according to the social rules of the clan, he is meant to be ostracized and basically has a life of confinement ahead of him because the spirit of the cat also has this monstrous sort of like double spirit that sometimes comes out, which is very scary. And yeah, so that affects him for sure. Um, he is definitely one of the more emotionally complex characters. It's kind of hard to root for him
At first,
throughout the
yeah.
show, um, but the thing that is, I think, one of the first things that like ever really happens to him is that his mother commits suicide, basically like right in front of him.
Hmm.
Um, And Kyo's sort of character trajectory is figuring out how to love despite that and despite
Yeah, and learn how to
having,
forgive himself and to
yeah.
learn to love, because like she can't do it for him. She is not alive. uh,
Ah!
and he blames himself a lot for how deep are we going to talk about the characters this episode? Are we going to like go really in deep, or we're
No,
just
not
gonna?
really in deep, but like, whatever you feel like you need to say about it for right
All
now.
right. So I won't say too much because then we were planning on really getting into the characters next episode. But like, yeah, it's like really interesting how like his story arc, because like it's really vague about whether like why his mom killed herself. Like people say it's because he's the cat and she couldn't handle it. But it's like not really clear, and like we will never know because he will never know and we will never know, and he has to learn how to like forgive himself anyways, right?
Because there's also hints dropped that like she maybe committed suicide too because like her marriage was very abusive.
Mm-hmm.
Um and I mean, his mom is also not the only one who kind of like implied that they might take their life because of the curse. Like Momiji's mother also says some really messed up stuff about like
Yeah, about having a
So yeah, it's not great. And I think that again, while suicide is a very heavy topic and it should be treated as such, this show does something kind of intriguing with the topic as a whole. It's never gratuitous, even though it is brought up a couple times with a couple of characters. It's never. I'm not gonna say never, but it is used. I'm trying to find the words for it because it's really hard to explain. And like I don't want to cross into like dangerous territory while talking about this because it is a very fine line. But I don't think that Fruits Basket crosses that line. I wouldn't know how to quantify that line, but if I saw it, I would know.
it's not
I
13
think
Reasons Why.
yeah, I was literally about to say that. Oh my god. I was like, for instance, 13 Reasons Why is a show that talks about suicide that definitely crosses that line, but Fruits Basket does not. Um, and however you would like to define that or however you'd like to take that, please do. But yeah, like it is a.
I think it really plays with suicide with the importance and the gravitas that it deserves.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yes.
it's very careful and it feels like every moment it's used serves a genuine purpose for
Yes.
someone's character arc to talk about something, to have a discussion, right? Instead of
Yes.
just like having a show that like 13 Reasons Why really feels like a show where it's like, wouldn't it be cool if we did a show like this? And then that's kind
Oh
of where
my
like the discussion
god.
ended. Whereas like Fruits Basket, every time it brings up the topic of suicide, it feels very intentful and very purposeful, and like
Mhm.
it doesn't feel like it wastes those moments. And I think I haven't read
Mhm.
the manga, so I don't know how it is in the manga, because manga is serialized. You write it week by week. I do imagine planning
Mhm.
out is harder, but the anime,
Mhm.
with the gift of hindsight, at the very least, has the
Mhm.
ability and opportunity to like tackle this topic well, and I think it does.
I would absolutely agree that it tackles it well. Um, but yeah, it affects people just like it does in real life,
Yeah.
and the effects are realistic. I would say, um, this is something that impacts Kyo every single day. Like seriously, it
Yeah.
affects the way that he interacts with other characters. It affects the way that other characters interact with him, and exactly like you said, I feel like it's truly given like the gravitas and the emotional weight and the realistic weight of everyday treatment and everyday like survival along with it
Hmm.
for sure. Um, Now moving on to a lighter topic.
You really like put suicide at the top of the list. Like you're like,
I really
here's the
did.
order we're gonna go.
I just wanted to get it out of the way, kind of.
Honestly, looking at it,
I didn't want to like build up to it
yeah,
because that felt like weird.
it does get,
Um,
I guess, kind of lighter from.
I guess kind of lighter from
But
here, but the second topic
also,
is
like, all these topics are their own very distinct type of like painful. So like, it's
yes.
like comparing apples to oranges. Like, what's worse? I wouldn't try to compare them. It's not a productive thing to try to rank these types of pain.
Yes. So please don't. Okay, but the second one that I did want to cover is self harm, which is honestly like I feel like when people think of self harm, they think of like the physical aspect of self harm. But this series does such a good job in showing the ways that people can harm themselves that isn't just physical,
Hmm.
that is mental. Like self isolation, self effacing, efface,
Don't
self
ask me.
effacing,
Can't.
self effacing, self
Okay,
the act of self effacing.
pick one pronunciation and say it with confidence right into the camera.
I refuse because then somebody is going to criticize me. Um,
They already going to.
uh,
It's too late for that. You're already
it
past
is.
that line.
I spent like 10 seconds on that. Um, And they're several characters who go through this personal cycle with themselves. Kyo, again. We have Yuki as well, who self isolates, sort of self idealizes as well. Hattori, who self isolates. Toru, who you wouldn't expect her to
Yeah.
have, this aspect of her character that is like that, but because she's the happy-go-lucky heroine, you know, and she is really like depicted as that, at least definitely for the first like 2 seasons, until it starts getting a little bit more into her personal characterization, and then you're like, oh, this girl has had like a truly fucked up life. That is crazy. And then Akito, which I gotta say, I think Akito's version of self harm is definitely the most fascinating to me because they self harm by harming everybody else around them.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't work as well as it does, but it works. And you have to watch it to like understand what's happening. But yeah, no,
To
she
keep
self
people up,
isolates.
Akito has the spirit of God in their
Yes,
little
yes.
whole relationship thing. So like Kyo's the
Yeah.
cat, Yuki's the rat. Akito has a very interesting and special role in this as being God, who is both like the progenitor of all this abuse, but also like a product of this power system that puts her at the top, but also expects a lot from her in really weird ways that I guess we can get to. Sorry,
Yes,
I
which we are
interjected
going to get
there.
into. No, you're totally great. I think that's valuable context. But yeah, so self harm it presents in so many different ways, and it is really truly explored in a way that I think is better than just the physical aspect of it, simply because I think that self harm in and of itself it's such a broad umbrella. But a lot of times when you hear that somebody has been self harming or has self harming tendencies, we think just of the physical aspect. But self harm, you can do that so many ways. And it's really dangerous because when it's framed in just the physical aspect, you almost don't recognize that there is like a whole psychological aspect to it that so many people do to themselves on a daily basis that they don't recognize as self-harmful tendencies. There is
hmm
like this really powerful scene where Toru is talking about how like if I can be valuable and if I can be kind and good to the people around me, that means like I deserve to live. And I'm like, that's
It's
crazy.
crazy.
That's wild. I know so many people pleasers who say stuff like that and don't realize that they are like digging themselves into this hole, this psychological hole that destroys them. And showing it in this way of of Toru being a sympathetic character because she is the heroine, right, but also in this way of like Toru is good, but being good is not always good for her, and she could stand to be more selfish, and that is
That's her arc.
yeah, and it's cool too because again, like if I kind of said like, oh, like she cares too much and that's hurting her, a lot of people wouldn't necessarily define that as self-harm. But the story does such a good job at framing it that way, and it's just so compelling that it's really helpful to be able to see it like that, I think.
All while
At least
also
I would
not
say so.
condemning being good to other people.
Yes, right, exactly.
It's
Exactly.
like you shouldn't spend your whole life being good to other people, but they also still emphasizes that like being good to people is good, and like a lot of the reason
Mhm.
why like people get over the things that they do is partially because she is good to people. It's a
Mhm.
balance.
I will also say that I think overall, and we'll probably get more into this with like characterization and stuff next episode, but like Akito and Toru are kind of like yin and yang.
hmm
While Toru kind of lives for everybody else, and that is how she is, Akito lives necessarily for herself, but out of this like deep seated terror of abandonment. And so like they almost present like as mirror opposites of one another, which is really, really fascinating, and I really like it. And I think that one of the ways that this manifests is the way that they like harm themselves.
Hmm.
You see that Toru just has a tendency to give herself completely away, whereas Akito does not know how to have any kind of emotional connection with someone because she's so afraid that like they're going to leave her. So being able to sort of see their characters side by side, specifically like in how they have these like really harmful tendencies towards themselves, is really fascinating and adds a really interesting character dynamic to the two of them.
I'm really glad you brought up the self harm thing because like I never caught that, and but it's so obvious now that you like laid it out, and like my brain's just turning because a lot of things that didn't completely make sense, and it's, part of the reason why we do the podcast is to help me make sense uh, of things. Like talking about it helps a lot. So like so many things are just like clicking way more into place that you brought up like that specific aspect of it, and it's just like dang. You just
Yeah, it's pretty
open the
cool.
world for me for this show.
It's pretty cool. I'm pretty smart, I guess. No, but like, yeah, that's why we talk about it, you know. And I will also say, on the topic of talking about it, if there's anybody out there who feels the need to talk about something, talk about it.
Talk
Like,
about it.
go somewhere to talk about it, please, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to get it off your chest, right? And something that the show does very well is highlighting communication and why communication is so important and vital, just in terms of being able to have some kind of connection or somebody to check back with about your well-being and your safety and your happiness. So please, like, if you need to talk to somebody, please talk to somebody. Um,
It's worth it
we
for your
have a
show.
Discord, so but it is worth it. And even at like rock bottom, which so many of these characters hit rock bottom like over and over and over again, there will be somebody out there that is willing to like reach out a hand and like help you out. So talk, please. And speaking of
Yeji
talking and
demands
not
it.
being able to talk, I do. Ostracism is a huge part of characterization for so many of these characters. Again, with Kyo, I feel like Kyo is just my content list. He's just my content warning. Like, he goes through like all of these, and at some point,
Hiro is like the one who like has to deal with all of this the most because of his position in like society.
he's got it the worst.
Yeah.
He really
I mean,
does.
if we're gonna like view like the my power structure analysis version of it, Kyo is basically like the ultra minority, right? Like he's 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 the one who like gets all of the problems because society is literally structured around him being put
At the
down.
bottom.
Like literally the justification that the characters have for why Kyo exists, why the cat spirit continues to be reborn, is to remind the rest of the spirits how much worse they can have it. Right? So like Kyo in that way like plays the role of like our most like disparaged minorities. Like
Mm-hmm.
like black women in America or like in other cultures like they have different types of people who are like put down to maintain power structures, right? But like
Mm-hmm.
that's the role that he explicitly plays, so he's going to feel all of that because that's how everyone else d- is conditioned to not question the power structure.
I think that it's so fascinating too because like if you want to view different aspects of his character as like different minority groups, you literally can. Like, okay, because he gets discriminated on based on his like appearance. Like, he has orange hair, which like this takes place in Japan, and like he gets ostracized and bullied for his hair color. Which, like, I know a lot of people are like, oh, boo hoo, like hair color. But, like, it's a genuine thing that he goes through in the show. So you could talk about, like, being discriminated against based on your appearance. He, like, is supposed to be confined for most of his adult life, prison structures, and
Yeah.
like the way that minorities are like relegated to having either being confined to like certain communities that they can't escape or like literally going to prison when they are adults. Like the fact that he's basically homeless, not having any parental figures, um, or like having issues accepting parental love. Like there's so many, like being an orphan. Like there's so many, and this poor kid, I just want to get him like a blanket and a cup of tea and just be like, there, it'll be
He's a
okay.
cat. Cup of milk.
Um, yeah, a cup of milk. You have it so good, you don't even
For
know.
audio listeners, she turned around and looked at Snowball.
Look at him sitting on my bed like a little posh princess. Anyways, um,
Authorization. Okay, we tangented a bit.
ostracization, ostracism. Let's go. So there are a few characters in this that aren't part of the Soma clan. We have Uotani and Hanajima, who are friends of Toru's best friends. And the three of them are kind of like the social outcasts of their high school. Uotani she was part of a biker gang, so she's kind of, like a little bit on the masculine side. She's pretty hard. And Hanajima is like this spiritual goth, witchy, honestly, like mother, right? I love her, mommy, like so good. I love her character so much. She is goth queen vibes. Like I love her. And the three of them
Every
are
episode, we need to have
like
Yeji identify at least one character as mommy.
at least one character as mommy. And yeah, so the three of them were kind of like they're, three musketeers, don't really fit in anywhere, little trio. And
Yeah,
it
Tori's an
is,
orphan.
it's actually, huh?
Tori's an orphan, literally.
Yeah, Tor is an orphan. So I actually think that in this case, ostracism is kind of presented as this like kind of good thing, at least in this sort of way that like because they were all ostracized for different things, they all kind of found this like goofy little, you know, personal family that they can always like kind of come back to and have like for each other and with each other. And I just really love like the three of them, and I actually think that like the ostracism in that way is presented almost as this like catalyst for their family like familial like relationship. So while ostracism is bad and Kyo kind of embodies this like the bad side of ostracism and like all the mental repercussions that come with that, for Hanajina, Uotani, and Toru, it's presented almost as this like catalyst for this wonderful friendship, right? Almost framing it in this like sympathetic and good way, which I think is cool. Like I think that bad things happen and good things can come out of them. And for this one, it's the sweetest
Yeah.
trio relationship literally in any story ever. Like I fucking love all three of them. I would die for all three of them.
Yeah, it's like saying that like no matter how like separate from everyone else you feel, there's always someone there for
Mhm.
you to have a genuine connection with. Like no one's ever truly alone. Even
Mhm.
if like most of society doesn't particularly want to fuck with you, there,
Mhm.
you got your ride or die still somewhere.
Mm.
So
For
yeah,
sure.
there's community in everything, right? Like no one's truly no one truly has to be alone, right?
Mhm. Um I think yeah, I think that's all that I have to say about ostracism. Um so familial abuse. God damn it.
It's not getting easier. I thought you promised it was gonna
It's
get
I'm
easier.
sorry, okay? This is some heavy stuff we're working with right now. So the familial abuse aspect of
Wait,
this
wait.
is
Can I just read your notes for this? It says
oh my
familial
god.
abuse: colon Bro, this is literally the premise of the entire show. And you're right. You're right. I can't even argue with that.
It literally is. Like, that's the whole thing. So we were talking earlier about how Akito is God and how God has this like extant connection with the rest of the family. So that basically gives her a free ticket to like abuse every single person in this fucking family. You want to talk about characters that are hard to root for? Akito is definitely
The
the
hardest.
character that you do not want, you know.
Maybe her mom's worse.
Oh.
I'll get to that later, but I feel like the inclusion of her mom's very. I'm not the biggest
Yeah,
fan of it. I'm not the
you're
biggest fan of
actually probably right.
it.
That's actually true. Her mom's pretty fucking horrible. Um, but Akito is. I remember I was looking up the character wikis for all of the characters in Fruits Basket for our part two research, and I looked up Akito, and in her hobbies section,
I didn't know about this. I'm excited.
it literally says abusing her family.
Whoever wrote that is so cheeky. I
Like,
love whoever wrote that.
whoever wrote that, first of all, I love you. You're a comedic genius. Second of all, it's literally true. Like for the first 3 seasons of the show, that is the only thing Akito is presented as doing or does ever.
Literally. Yeah, literally. Yeah, yeah.
And it's really bad. It's really fucking bad. And she is kind of the reason why a lot of these characters have like the personal problems that they do, is because she treated them very fucking horribly. And yeah, there's that. And just like you were saying before, like the curse is kind of the reason why a lot of the secondary things happen to a lot of the characters as well. Like Akito abuses her family, and therefore like the rest of the family members also find it reasonable and okay to abuse other members of the family too.
Hmm.
So it's just like this vicious Ouroboros where like she, for instance, like when she was abusing Yuki, which she abused Yuki when he was a child, like physically, verbally, like she would beat him and like lock him in a closet by himself for like, and like he was just a child. Like it's fucked up. Like it's literally so fucked up. But like, and that's the reason why like his family kind of also rejects him, is because they're like, oh, like you belong to Akito, like you don't have any self autonomy or anything like that. And so it's like that abuse is the reason why he also gets ostracized by his own family and experiences familial abuse from like his parents. And it's just it's so fucked up. It's
Yeah.
so fucked up.
I, I
Like it's really bad.
I find it really interesting how like this show with like the kids, the Zodiac kids and their parents, how like their
Hmm.
parents are like not completely like straight up evil. They're not like physically abusive the way that Akito is, and they're not like literally pure evil the way Akito's mom is.
Hmm.
But they still hurt their children in a lot of very different and nuanced ways because of how much that they buy into the power structure set by the Zodiac. Right? Like these aren't
Hmm.
inherently bad people, but because they wholeheartedly believe that the power structure that the Zodiac uh offers and brings is the natural inherent way of the world, right? They make actions with that assumption, and those actions are the things that end up hurting their kids, right? And I
Hmm.
think that's I genuinely do think Fruits Basket is a criticism of like unconscious power structures. It like for
Hmm.
multiple reasons, but this is one of those ways, right? Where it's like these parents could be like good parents, but because that they bought into like the Zodiac thing and like and the power and prestige that it brings, like and the fact that they chase it, right? Like because like there are good Zodiac parents in the show, like Kisa's mom and like Hiro's parents, like are like
Hmm.
good, and like they're good because they don't really buy into this crap. you know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they accept it as a part of this of the world that they live in, right? And they do make moves around
Mm-hmm.
it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they don't like buy into it the way Yuki's mom does, right? And that's why
Mm-hmm.
like Hiro and like Hisa are like better off and not as emotionally damaged. I mean, they do have their emotional problems, but they're not like suffering in the way Yuki had to because of his parents like buying into it.
Yeah. And I think that is like as many bad examples as there are in this show, I think that there are good examples as well, and like healing examples and ways that it is depicted where you're like, okay, like you get a pass, I guess, right? And but this one also, I think it speaks also to a larger problem generally of generational abuse too. Um,
Yeah.
because this curse has affected so many generations, it's been going on for such a long time within the same clan, and these rules are just a given at this point, right? People don't even think about it anymore. But that's how generational abuse works.
Yeah.
It's that it would become so entrenched, it becomes so like normalized that emotionally these people think that that is the emotional baseline,
Hmm.
that that is normal, that there is no other way. And particularly with familial abuse, this is so difficult, not only in the show, but in real life, because you can't necessarily escape your blood, right?
Yeah.
Ever. You cannot climb out of the body that you were born in and get new genetics. Like, you are, in many ways, metaphysically tethered to your family. And this shows how the cycle of abuse can be just so entrenched and so, like, to the extreme, of course, but like definitely it shows how this system, this cycle, this the bad stuff, right? And how it can just continue until it's just how people think that it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Um, and unlearning that and realizing that that's not how it's supposed to be and how it should be is like the first step in the healing process, and it's this first step that so many of the characters ultimately take to break the curse. So again, like I when I said like, bro, this is literally the premise of the entire story, like familial abuse has a huge factor in the way that all of these characters interact with themselves, interact with everybody else around them, and ultimately like how the plot comes into fruition as well. So
Yeah.
it's familial abuse is apparently a very good plot device.
For the show at least.
Oh my god, there's gonna be so many bad quotes from this episode, guys. Please bear with me. Um, so I'm gonna kind of lump in the next 2 points that I wanted to make. So gender and power dynamics and queerness. Um, this series came out in the 90s, like early 2000s. Um, and I think it could have done a lot more, honestly, in terms of queer representation. There are so many characters in this where I'm just like, you're gay. And then they turn out to be straight. And I'm like, oh shit.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a
Damn
lot of
it. That actually sucks.
missed opportunities, especially with the concept of them being hugged by the opposite sex, uh, and turning into like their zodiac spirit form, right?
Yeah.
Inherently kind of begs to talk about gender and queerness, like
But also, like, just fall in love with someone from the same gender.
yeah.
Like, I don't know. And, like, of course, I'm not saying, like, just be gay because you're cursed. Like, that's not effective either. But also, like, the chances that there are 13 of these people and not one of them had enough of a queer tendency to be like, I'll just date women for the rest of my life or men for the rest of my life. Like, that's the problem solved right there, you know? But we'll put that aside. We'll my suspension of disbelief is like, it's suspended. But so Akito in particular, we were talking about how like she has this like huge burden on for the family because she's the head of the family, which is a big part of her character arc as well. But Akito actually presents as a man. We think that Akito is a man for like the
Okay,
first three
okay. I'm gonna
seasons
be
of the
real.
show.
I was never convinced that Akito was a man.
All right. Well,
It was a
whatever.
surprise to me when it was revealed that Akito was a woman. Not because I was surprised Akito was a woman. I was surprised that that was a thing that like people thought. It was just like
You were like, "What? You didn't see that?" Like, I don't know if it's meant to be like super obvious that Akito is a woman, but I think it's definitely meant to be like a question of like what are you? Like, and she presents as in the show she's like where she dresses in like a very androgynous way, um and just overall like she presents as a guy. And in Japanese particularly as well, like you use different personal pronouns and you use different words when referring to people, and like throughout the series she is referred to with like exclusively male pronouns and
mhm.
male like vocabulary signifiers, until like the big reveal, right? Which apparently for you wasn't even a big reveal, so whatever. So I was actually reading up on this, but there was I think a Reddit post that I read of like one could argue that Akito is actually a trans woman, even if she is biologically a woman. She's a trans woman considering that she was assigned male at birth and had to live her life socially as a man until she actively decided to be a woman.
Interesting.
And I actually really like that analysis. When you talk about being trans, when you talk about being
Mhm.
trans, a lot of times people do relegate it to biology. But at the end of the day,
It's
like
about gender performance.
it is about gender performance, and it is also about like political and social identity,
Mhm.
right? So if you are presenting and you can pass socially as a guy, you're a guy, right? In the eyes of the law and in the eyes of everybody else around you, right? Like, so if you're socially considered a male, you are a male,
Mhm.
right? So one could argue that, as Akito is, presenting as a man and has been doing that since she was very, very young, you could argue that she was assigned male at birth. I actually like that
Yeah, I think
argument.
that
Not
brings us
argument, but
something.
like I like that
I
analysis.
think that brings us something really nuanced about like gender and like identity and performance and stuff like that. That like yeah, because it like flips the script on that, and being able to look at it in that way really like brings out something really nuanced about it, and like how it's not even really tied to biology. It's really social. It's really a social thing, right? Because like the important part is the assignment and then the rejection of that assignment, right? The biology assignment is usually dictated by biology, but the person making this argument makes a really good point that it's like, I mean, it usually it 99.999% of the time usually assignment is dictated by biology, but like by purposely
Sometimes it's
yeah, by
not.
purposely mixing it up, it really shows how arbitrary that assignment is. Yeah.
And I think that Akito is definitely one of the most nuanced characters of the entire show. She's not my favorite character,
No.
but I do think that like her story is very fascinating, and there's a lot of like interesting things to be said about the way that she is and has existed. But at the end of everything, again, spoiler alert, she decides to start presenting as a woman, and she lives with Shigure, and they live happily ever
That's
after.
something to talk about when we get to characters later because
Yes, that is, it's definitely something that I'm going to talk about more. But with gender and power dynamics, one of the reasons why Akito does have to present as male is because she is the head of the family. And so, because she was born a woman and her family knew that nobody would respect the head of the family unless they were male. She had to take on this identity, not just as like a personal and social like identity, but as an identity that is directly linked to the well-being of her family members and like everybody around her. This not only gets into like the familial power dynamics but also gender dynamics when you start talking about like, well, who is proper head of the family, right? And what does those responsibilities entail, and like who can actually take them on. And it doesn't actually have anything to do with gender, but when speaking about it within these terms, it's clear that like the gender aspect does matter. So we find a lot of really good and interesting and dynamic commentary on gender and power dynamics within the character of Akito and the way that she interacts with characters around her. There's this really interesting scene where she kind of like is, I don't really want to use this word because it's like it's a complicated situation, but like she basically seduces Shigure to get something that she
Yeah.
wants, and he makes the blunt ass comment of like, you always use your femininity as a weapon against me. And it's interesting that whenever Akito wants to assert power over the family as a whole, she presents as male, right?
Hmm.
But when she's trying to assert power over like the men in her family, she uses like her feminine wiles. I just think that's so
That's
like
yeah.
I could talk about that for hours. Like it's so good, it's so complex, it's so like weird and strange and like I don't know, it's
Yeah.
very charged. But it's pretty
Her
cool. It's
character
pretty
embodies a
cool.
lot of really interesting ways in which power is like wielded. In like so many different fascinating ways, and like how it's like wielded, how it's harmful to other people around her, how it's harmful to her, how it's like, man, that was so good.
It is. And again, the presentation of all of these things isn't necessarily perfect. Um Well, I don't think I would have changed it necessarily. I do think that there could have been more said. Like, I don't have a problem at all with Akito at the end deciding that she like wants to start presenting as female. Like, I have absolutely no issue with that. I don't think that's the problem with including this as a plot point. I just think that the dynamics that are presented here, and also the way that like cross-dressing and like transgenderism and like gender presentation is like talked about and used in the story is just not as comprehensive as I would like it to be.
Yeah,
There is another character in this named Ritsu, and she is the
monkey
monkey
spirit.
zodiac,
Yeah,
and she presents as female. And it's like this huge thing where like Toru hugs her at one point and like she turns into a monkey and they're like, "Oh my god, you're actually a dude." And then she tries to like throw herself off the roof of the house. It's like the most dramatic fucking thing ever.
yeah.
But like she also begins to present as male later, or I guess he also starts to present as male like later in the show. Like at the end, he's basically just fully presenting as male, and like apparently he has a crush on like Shigure's editor or something like that.
That poor lady.
And I'm like, okay, I understand that everybody needs like a happy ending, you
You
know,
know,
but like
considering what Shigure does to
why?
her, someone had to end up with her. She needed a happy ending.
Well, I guess the editor deserved a happy ending, but like with Ritsu, I was like,
I think Ritsu could
I
have
don't
found a happy ending. There is a writing choice in which Ritsu could have
outs
made a happy ending without having to present male,
start presenting
because
as
it
male.
doesn't there are so many good threads in this show about how people feel pain, how they express it, and how helping fix that pain like manifests in certain ways and stuff like that. I think one of the only characters that doesn't really make sense for me is with Ritsu, because I don't see how Ritsu not dressing as a woman anymore really helped with anything. right?
I just don't
But like,
understand how that was like an aspect of the curse that like helped her break her
yeah,
curse.
like it doesn't. I'm not sure why that made their life better.
Yeah.
Like it's just super unclear to me.
Mm.
Whereas like everything else, it just feels pretty clear. Like Kyo, like certain things. Toru helps him with that, and like that's how he gets better. Threads are very clear, but for Ritsu, it feels kind of really arbitrary. Like it just shows up in
Mhm.
season 3 and now is not cross dressing anymore, and it's like I thought you liked it. Like like go for it. Like if
Yeah.
that's the thing that you enjoyed, like I don't see why you're stopping. And they never really give like there is a version of this in which this is like justified and well explained, and I can accept it. Right? I'm not saying that
Yes.
the character has to continue to cross dress for the entire show. It's just like for a show that explains things so well, this just
Yeah.
doesn't feel like it was explained.
Mhm. And I think that that was like the biggest downfall of it is that like I remember like I just remember like there was an episode where I was like, who is that? And then like somebody called their name and it was like Ritsu. I was like, what? Like where did I miss the part where they started to just present as like a dude again? Like I completely missed it. It completely went over my head. I think that like and again, maybe I just physically missed it. Like maybe I just wasn't watching the show like I wasn't like conscious watching the show like when that actually happened necessarily, but like it kind of happens out of the blue and it isn't explained. At least not in again, not as comprehensively as I would like it to be. And it's the same issue that I had with Akito. And Akito is like a main character at that point. And I'm like, I think there needs to be a little bit more of like a really solid concrete reason as to why, you know. Obviously with Akito it is more of a symbolism of like she's shedding these expectations that her family, her mother and her father had for her, pushed onto her against her will, and she's like taking that off, and that makes sense. Even though I wish they had spent a little bit more time on it, I can understand that. With Ritsu it's just not ever talked about
Yeah.
at all. um So that's why I would say that I think that maybe the author was just a little bit careless with that. I think that there should have been a little bit more time and effort dedicated to making it a really like emblematic experience, and I just think that there should have been like a little bit more research or something done on it before it was included in the story. But it's not like it doesn't kill the story in the crib, it's not like horrible effacing, like oh my god this is like actually transphobic. No, it's not like that. It's just I wish that there was a little bit more done with it.
Yeah. It's
So
like to give it the benefit of the doubt, and I think it does a good job of like talking about really difficult things. So I will honestly give it the benefit of the doubt. It's also just like the
mhm.
time that it was made
Yeah.
was just not like it. I feel like for the time it's made, it already is transgressive. Um, like
Mhm.
through what's Yuki's brother's name's character through through his character.
Yuki's brother?
Yeah, the snake, spirit.
Oh, IMA.
Ayame through like Ayame's character, through Akito, through
I forget that they're brothers.
Ritsu.
I forget they're brothers every time.
Yeah, but like through those characters, it's already being pretty transgressive for like 1990. So like, especially
Yeah.
1990s Japan,
Mhm.
right?
That's fair.
So like, it's not like it's like it could have done better, but also like
It definitely could have done
it
worse.
could have done worse. It could have done worse.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would agree with that. I think that like with what it was working with, it did what it did and it did it for the most part well. But like especially with the 2019 remake, I was kind of hoping that they would have like maybe subverted it. And of course they were staying true to form and I respect that as well, right? It is like the author's story and if they don't want that changed then I have to respect that, of course, right? But like for instance, like with Hatsuharu, right? Who is again goth king icon. I love him. He's like fully pierced up, right? He's like dual hair colors. I'm like he's already rocking like he's already rocking this like bisexual male icon vibe, you know, and it's really working for him. And then and he like openly flirts with Yuki and like openly,
Yeah, I
you
forgot
know,
how queer
is
his character is.
like literally he's so queer coded, and at the end it's like no, he has a goth girlfriend too, and like they're happy together. And like that's fine, but like then just make him straight. Like, don't do the thing where you like make him like flirtatious with the boys and like actually flirtatious with the boys, and then don't actually do anything with it, you know? It just feels a little bit too queer baity for me,
Yeah.
and I just can't root for that as strong as
Even if he was
I,
bi, they could still have done more with that.
I know! Like, oh my god, they so many missed opportunities. Also, like with IMA, like, and like and there's a difference, right, between like being trans and just cross-dressing. But with like IMA, he's like long hair, like he wears almost this like dress-like garment the entire show. Like he sells maid outfits like as his fucking
He's a
living.
tailor,
Like
yeah.
and like there is I don't know, there's like so much here to work with that I'm like, oh, I would have loved to see like this here would have been just great. And I don't know, they didn't do it, and that's okay. But
Honestly, I do like
it's got to
IMA.
be said that it does edge on being pretty queer baity at times, and it's hard for me to watch because I'm like, if you're gonna use this, you might as well go the whole 9 yards. But you actively deciding not to and deciding to make this person straight, that's a choice. It's a choice, and I don't necessarily agree with it. Right?
All right. What's uh what's next on the list?
Oh my freaking god. Okay. Well,
I think
hmm.
the last
I
three
think for
can
these
be like
last three, I can kind of lump them together, but I will also say that I kind of want to save these three for for our like individual characterizations. Now that I'm thinking about it,
okay.
because I think that these three are the most, I guess, quote unquote basic, but they are kind of the ones where like every single character struggles with a version of this. So we're gonna talk about it for a really, really long time the next
It
episode.
will be
I
done.
feel like it might just be like redundant. Yeah. But it's self doubt, anxiety, and depression. Um and yeah, basically every single character struggles with like a version of this. And we will be
Spoiler for our
getting
next
real deep.
episode. We will be
Yeah,
talking about
real deep into
self-doubt,
those.
anxiety, and depression, and all of the things that we talked about above.
Yeah. But the last thing that I did want to talk about is that this is technically a romance shoujo anime manga, and normally I go gross to romance shoujo manga and
Really?
anime, but this show's so good. This show is so good. Like the slow burns, like the way that, you know, all of the romance is like really truly earned is just so refreshing. And it's not just like goo goo gaga, cute boy meet cute girl. Like, of course they end up together. It's like, oh my god, the romance is so, like, it's hard. It's fucking hard to watch. It's hard to, like, digest and process. And every time somebody gets, like, rejected or turned down or, like, something, how you're feeling it every step of the way. It's so good. The romance is so good in this. Um, but yeah, how do you feel about the romance in this?
I find it interesting because how do I put this? Here's a hot take. I don't consider this a romance show. I consider it
Fair
a show
enough.
about like pain and trauma, healing, and relationships, right? But I think romance is really like kind of the cherry on top sweet ending that we get. But like I don't really think it's ever like truly the focus nor the point, right? Because
Mm,
to call this a romance show, I think does it a disservice because it would imply that like healing and romance are like inextricably intertwined, and like I just don't think that's
mm-hmm.
true. You
Mm-hmm.
made a joke somewhere in one of the last earlier episodes where it's like kissing someone's not gonna solve your problems, and like, and I think this is kind of like where like why I hesitate to call this a romance show because like the romance isn't what helps these people. It's their relationships with themselves, their relationships with other people, a lot of thoughtful
Mm-hmm.
introspection, right? And then at the end, they're happy and now they can be open to being a part of a relationship, right?
Mm,
Toru and Kyo don't get together until they can both find happiness with themselves first, and for in Kyo's case, forgive himself, and in Toru's case, love herself more, right? And
mm-hmm,
then after they have moved through that, because of each other, right? They have
mm-hmm,
helped each other move through that, but it's not until after all of that that they've truly become comfortable with themselves that they can start dating, right? Which is why,
mm-hmm.
like, I kind of hesitate to call it a romance, because, like, I don't think that's like the end goal for any of these characters. It's just the nice thing that they get to be able to do next in their life now that they have like gone through this.
You are absolutely right. I think that dumbing it, not dumbing it down, but like simplifying it to being like it's a romance anime is like definitely doing it a disservice because there's so many things that happen besides like this person ends up with this person. Um, but just like on the romance level though, I think that what they do with it works for the most part. I will say there's some toxic shit in this too. Some of these characters have like nervous attachment styles, and that's like really hard to watch sometimes. Where like someone will say something, and I'll be like, "Oh, babes, you're not ready for a relationship. You need to take like 5 steps back. Be single for a little bit, right?" There's like a couple times where you're kind of seeing like a somewhat rival dynamic too between like Yuki and Kyo, and I think that like a lot of people think that that's going to be one of the main romance plots in the show is like Toru deciding whether or not she wants to marry like Yuki or Kyo, and that takes a backseat so fast in this show. That's like maybe 5 episodes of the first season in which that is maybe a factor, and then it just becomes such a back burner, backseat plot point for the rest. Also, like,
I love that about the show, though. Like,
I do too. I do too. And I think it is so fucking hilarious that, like, they're like, yeah, like, it's gonna be like Yuki against Kyo with, like, Toru. And then, like, at the end, when, like, Yuki is talking to Toru about her, like, moving away with Kyo, he's like, you're actually like my mom.
it does.
Bro, can you imagine? Can you imagine having like a kind of romance with this guy, right? You've lived in his house for like 2 years,
Yeah.
and then
It's
he's
like,
like,
I wanted a
"Yeah,
mother
like
figure
I
the whole
loved
time.
you, but you're basically just my mom. Like I would simply pass away. I would simply pass away. I would simply be like, no, I think that that's enough life for now. Like, I think that's good.
I really wish Yuki said something like a good friend or something, because, like, yeah, I do think that's odd, and I feel like there's just so
It's
much
so
more value.
funny. Like,
I think it just like, yeah, yeah.
it's so funny. Like, it's sad and it's like kind of weird, but it's also really funny. Like, and it's done like 100% unironically, and I think that is also kind of funny. Like the part where the author was like, yeah, this is like emotional and good. Like this is the emotional catharsis this character needs right now. And
And she
I
had
don't
like
know,
such a
like
good
it
out,
makes me
because she could have
giggle.
just been like, "I really love you as a friend," and like they can have a really strong platonic relationship, and then like,
Oh my
and
god.
like that's your
No.
easy out. That's
No.
your easy
That shit's
out.
boring. That shit's boring. It's too fucking boring. We've done that too many times. Nah. You're my mom, bro. Like, oh, the fucking pain that like oh my god, I feel that in my chest. That like hurts me physically. Um
I guess there is something to say with how like emotionally honest he was about that, though.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and again,
On one hand, in the universe of the story, I guess there's something to say about how he is emotionally vulnerable and willing to admit that. But on a meta level, why would you write him to need to be able to express that as his a moment of emotional vulnerability?
and again, like I am like kind of shitting on it because I do think it's funny, but that moment is such a good moment of like open dialogue and communication between two characters that are like finally going their separate ways after basically being like connected at the hip for a couple years. And like that conversation like wasn't going to be easy.
Hmm.
You know, it was going to be hard as shit, and like both of them handle it like mature adults, and they say what they need to say, and they're like, good, like this is where we are, this is who we are to each other, I love you, let's do the rest of our lives. Like,
Yeah,
it's healthy as fuck.
it
Like,
is.
as
As
funny as
weird.
it is, as funny as it is, as much as I am gonna shit on Yuki for calling Toru his mom, that shit is good. Like, it's good. And it's really, and I will say, like, that is kind of emblematic of how the rest of the show is, right? It's like, yeah, this is like kind of weird, or like this is kind of like funny, or this is kind of really fucking sad. But at the end of the day, like, each character just handles things in such a specific and nuanced way that you're just, you have no choice but to be like, okay.
To one more time, try to give it one more ounce of fairness. It's not that he thinks of her as his mom. Very specifically, what he says is, "I was looking for a mother figure," right? Which is like, I think,
Yeah.
kind of different in a way. It's like the reason why it looked like I was attracted to you was because I was looking for a mother figure and I figured it out and I moved past it. He's not saying I actually continue think of you now and continue to think of you as my mom. No, he's like,
You are my
yeah,
mom.
no, no. He's like, I had this trauma that manifested in me needing to have a mother figure, and that's what you. It's still odd,
It's still,
but
but
he's not moving
you're
forward with
framing
it.
it better than I
Yeah,
did. You're definitely giving him more credit than I did. I was like, bro, why would you say that? Like,
he's moving beyond it. Is I think what part of that
oh
conversation
my
was.
god, that's so funny. Yeah, in my notes, I fucking wrote, bro, can you imagine liking a guy and then him saying, "You're my mom," actually?
Yeah,
I think I'm a comedic genius. I think I'm really fun. Like, I find myself hilarious. Like, I tickle myself so much. Like, rereading my show notes makes me so happy. Like,
that's self love right there. That's self love. Okay.
I am a narcissist. Put it on the
The
record.
other day, yeah, you said I can't be nice. I can't say nice things to her because she already has too much of an ego.
Yeah, you're gassing me up too much, bro. Like,
That I'm only allowed to viciously attack her.
yeah, you can only viciously attack me because I'm not going to viciously attack myself because I'm perfect. I think I am perfect. So, um, also, like, okay, like the big three too, like the big three sort of like romantic relationships where everybody was like, ah, like finally it was Toru and Kyo,
Hmm.
Machi and Yuki, and Akito and Shigure. I say Shigure's name so fucking like American. I said that so Shigure. Um
Shigure. Shigure.
Shigure with fuck. God damn it. I am a weeb, I promise.
Can't throw away my fucking
Uh,
street cred. We did publicly
with
hate on Rent a Girlfriend, so I don't know how well we are accepted within the anime community now.
that's okay, listen. If you are a weeb and one of the animes that you are committed to is Rent a Girlfriend, you're invalid. I'm sorry. I'm not gonna validate that. I don't care. I don't care who you are. I apologize. I'm so sorry that that is what you think is good taste. But you are simply tasteless. That's what that means. And a joke's on us because we did a whole fucking podcast episode on it, but still, it's not valid. Um, okay. Rent a girlfriend
You know what's gonna
aside.
be really funny if we're doing Patreon votes, right? And someone
Oh
and they
god.
manage to vote up Rent a Girlfriend season 2.
Fuck.
No,
Guys, don't do it. Don't do this to me. Don't even do it ironically. I already did my like 3 weeks of therapy for that show, and if I have to do season 2, I will lose my goddamn mind.
I just want you to know that they got a third season and it is coming.
Oh my fucking god. Why? It's just the same thing over and over again. See, Fruits Basket only got 4 seasons, and it's a
Did
masterpiece.
they get four
And they
seasons?
did what they did, and they ended it well. I think it's four
They got
seasons.
three.
It's like
Oh wait, 2019,
3?
2019 got 2 full seasons and then a half season, and then there's technically the original Fruits Basket anime. So I guess depending on how you count it, that can be like
Mm,
four.
okay. Eh. Well, who's counting? I'm not.
I
I didn't
am.
watch the show.
I
Um,
literally was just counting it off for you.
fuck. Who's counting? Nobody's counting. Who are you? What's going on? Where am I? Um, but yeah, the big three romances, big three couples, they all end up together, and it's
It's really
it's
interesting
so much
that you
emotion.
thought about it that way because I was like, for the third one, I was gonna think Rin and Hatsuharu.
Okay, but were you really like ever thinking that they weren't gonna end up with one another?
No, that's true.
Yeah, like it's fucking given at the beginning. I'm like, oh, they dress the same. Game over. Like, um, but yeah, and we'll talk more about their like actual relationship dynamics and romances probably in the second episode. But each and every one of these romances and the side romances as well is like fully earned tooth and nail, fully fought for. Like it's a whole like triumphant moment when these characters like end up with each other and find each other, and it's all really good and for the most part pretty wholesome. So I'm really excited to talk about that and like dive into that because it's gonna be fun.
All right. Anything else? I think this is the end of your
It
end of your
is.
notes. All right. So, I guess before I
I
go,
just didn't want to like go too much into some stuff that I feel like we're gonna reserve for the next episode because I didn't want it to be too redundant.
that's
But
fair.
yeah,
Before I go,
we got more coming.
I think I just want to like give you guys a little reading guide for if you guys want to like put this watch it or read it before we get to the next episode. I don't know if you'll be able to put it together in 2 weeks, but like if anyone has found what we talked about interesting, Fruits Basket. So you got the manga, which is goes for 23 volumes.
Mm.
Uh, I have no idea where you can read it. I haven't read it. There's there's an anime, 2001, which is only the first part of Fruits Basket.
That came out in 2001?
Yes, 2001. It's like as old as you are.
Holy shit. I was like 2008, I think.
Not. And then
Fuck.
you have the 2019 version of the anime, which redoes the whole thing. Right, so they never finished it. Then the 2001 never finished. So they redid the whole thing in 2019. I'm so glad they did.
Hmm.
And that actually goes through the entire story, and that's 2 full seasons. So it's like I think it's like 26 episodes apiece for the first 2 seasons, and then season three is only like
Hmm.
12 or 13 episodes, something like that. Followed up by a
Okay.
movie, which is like, which is a bit of a prequel. Okay, like the first half of the movie is just basically a recap of the show, and then it's like an actual new piece of stuff, and that's all manga stuff.
Oh,
It's all adapted from the manga. It's not new stuff.
interesting.
Um,
I haven't seen the movie, but now I kind of want to watch it.
and if you really, really want more Fruits Basket, there is also an additional manga. I don't know if it's over or still running, called Fruits Basket Another, and it's like,
Yeah, isn't that like going over like after Kyo and Toru like eventually get married and stuff?
yeah, it's more about like the kids of
Ah!
all the stuff, and like
Oh, I
I
love
I
that.
hear it's good. I might pick it up sometime and read it. I do kind
That
of
sounds
want to
like
read
fun.
Fruits Basket first. I love the show enough that I would actually be willing to read the manga.
Hmm.
Uh, so maybe I'll read the manga first and then I'll read Fruits Basket
When I
another.
finish my other like 100 mangas that I have on my list. But yeah, that's all we got for you this time. But we will be back more with more Fruits Basket and more characters and more angst and trauma.
That next episode is going to be a like I don't even know like what the outline or anything looks like, but I can almost guarantee
Yeah.
that it's going to be a meaty one.
Yeah, you thought that this was emotionally intense. Guys, just wait, just wait. Just wait till the next
We were
one.
holding back.
We were. All right.
This podcast was produced by Yeji.
It was created and written by both of us.
It was edited by me.
The cover art was done by my good friend Emma Nebecker.
And the background art for the videos were done by my good friend Penelope Moreno.